It was very gradual. I mean, as a kid, for reasons I cannot explain to you, okay, I got very involved with gadgets and electronics. I had a remarkable thing happen to me because I grew up in New York at the end of the war. There's a part of New York where a lot of the war surplus stuff got delivered. I mean, transformers, capacitors, vacuum tubes, you name it, pieces of electronics. You could buy for $1. You could buy a radar set. You know, it was unbelievable what you could do. And I started making hi-fi stuff. The problem I had, you put your needle in the record, it made a terrible hissing noise, like that all the time. And it wouldn't bother you if the music was loud. Like, for example, the first movement of a Beethoven sonata was loud and fast. So the record scratch didn't bother you. But in the slow movement, that's all you heard. I tried to make filters that cut the high frequencies, but then when the music was loud, opened the bandwidth up again so you heard the full glory of the signal. And everything I made was worse than the record scratch. I mean, you hear, things like that, you know? And so I had to go to school. And that's what made me decided that I should go to college. And so I got an MIT. Don't ask me how that happened, but okay. And I started as an electrical engineer for that reason. And that's when I got disappointed terribly that they wouldn't let me talk to the faculty or get to talk to somebody who knew enough about this. I had to learn all sorts of stuff first. And that's when I went into physics.
You know, I have some friends who decided to become a scientist at later ages, and it was a deliberative process. I can't remember a time when I wasn't going to be a scientist, quite honestly, okay? Or at least something that was scientifically oriented. My dad was a doctor, and a small-town doctor, actually. And so I was brought up in kind of a household that was oriented towards scientific things. But I also grew up in the 1950s and 1960s, and in that era, we were just so aware of science. Everyone in the public was so aware of the foundational importance of science. You know, on the negative side or the fearful side, we lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. We saw the development of the atomic bomb, and unfortunately, its deployment. On the positive side, we saw the development of nuclear power. We saw the development of the transistor, electronics. All this happened in a very short order. And so you could not grow up in that era if you were at all aware. You know, in that sort of an era, you sort of always, my friends and I, and almost everyone I knew, at least was aware of science, and it was something that was considered a very high calling.
I'm not sure I ever made a decision, but I was certainly attracted to science from a very early age from two completely different angles. One was I grew up on the mud flats in my backyard in Florida, and I was just fascinated by stomping around in the echinoderms and the mollusks and fish and so forth, figuring that out. And then for the other side, a highly technological end, much less natural, was sort of computers, robots, as I saw them presented to me by Disney, and animatronics, and then my father's doctor's paraphernalia. So these are all very technical and artificial versus the natural of the mud flats. And so I was constantly that was around when I was 10. I wanted to see if I could make something that would use all of those somehow.